Welcome to the Franchise Masters podcast, where aspiring entrepreneurs learn what it takes to find, buy, and build successful franchise businesses. My name is Drew Carpenito, and I'm your host as we dive into these fascinating behind-the-scenes stories of people who have used surprising franchises to create massive success. I'm glad you're here. Let's dig in. Welcome to the Franchise Masters podcast. This is a special one for me because this is the first public announcement about a new venture that I'm involved with, along with my business partner, Andrew Horton, who is joining us to talk about all things of how to find and recruit high-quality franchisees for emerging brands. But Andrew and I have started a mini franchise sales organization. I use the word mini because we'll define how that goes throughout this conversation. But Andrew, first time on the podcast. Welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me. I would go with maybe boutique FSO versus mini, but it sounds cooler, right?
Yeah, it's open to interpretation. As you can tell, Andrew and I have known each other for a very long time, and you can't see Andrew, but I can. And how many pairs of Jordans do you have in your collection behind you?
As of this morning, 76. I got a new pair that came in from FedEx today.
It's just,
but I wear them.
Where were you last week buying Jordans from in the world?
By the pool in Puerto Vallarta, making bad decisions.
Andrew, he's got these, you can't see it. He's got this big wall of all these cool Jordan sneakers. And we've known each other for a long time. And somehow he convinced me to buy a pair, I don't know, 6-7 months ago, something like that. I now have 7 pairs.
Gotcha.
It's addicting. Yeah, it's very addicting as I'm wearing mine right now. But anyways, we're not here to talk about Jordans. So Andrew, maybe we can just kind of kick it off. Like, obviously we'll talk about Excel and, everything we do and really dive into, what young franchise companies need to know about scaling and growing and how to find good franchisees. And I think indirectly we'll talk to prospective franchisees as well about some of the stuff that are important for them to be aware of and look at with any franchises that they're evaluating. But why don't we kick it off with you sharing your story as a franchise lifer and how you got to this point.
Yeah, much like you said, a franchise lifer. I actually got into as a junior in college, an internship with Jeff Elgin, who founded FranChoice, our broker network, back in 2000. So I was there month 2, got to be an absolute sponge and learn franchising from one of the sharpest guys, the industry most successful guys in our world for sure, and then met hundreds and hundreds of emerging franchisors by trying to vet them out for FranChoice. I got to see a really cool side of franchising by looking at brands and talking to their founders, the CEOs, and their franchisees every day. So I got hooked immediately, joined the FranChoice corporate office. During that time, we became a franchisor out in Oregon. I went out there for a year plus. Buddy and I owned a CertaPro Painters franchise that he ran for a while. I'm a franchisee in the salon suites industry right now. And then I also do the same consulting work you do. I was helping people decide if franchising is a good path for them. And then Excel, which I'm very pumped about after all those years of you and I talking about it, is kind of off the ground and running here last couple of months. So that's kind of my franchise story.
Like a lot of people, you probably didn't go to school to, study franchising. You kind of fell into it, right? Accidentally.
I was an entrepreneurship major, but I had no clue what it was. I asked a professor, does anybody need an intern? I never had a real office job. So I was like, I got to probably get one of these before I go into corporate world. And then I met Jeff Elgin and the rest was history.
And that was how long ago was that?
2000. So it'll be 24 years next spring. And FranChoice went from full dead startup with 2 consultants to doing over 1,000 placements a year, some years across all different kinds of franchisors. So it was a really interesting perch to learn the industry and learn a lot of the lessons that we discussed, you and I. Like, you get to watch it from kind of a side seat. Okay, what works, what doesn't work, emerging brands that crush it, they're the ones that really have a hard time. So it was a great perch to learn franchising from.
Oh, I mean, it's tip of the spear in the emerging, mainly non-food side of franchising. Like, it is, you can't get into the belly of the beast any deeper in terms of the vantage point that you've had throughout your entire career, especially with FranChoice. And that's how you and I met. what, I'm sitting there, we're working at Advanclean with Jeff Duden, and we're trying to figure out like most emerging franchise companies, right? It's like, okay, great, we're franchising. Now what? We got the FDD, we got all the ops stuff, we built this software platform. It's great. We got a great business model. Now, how do we find franchisees? And it was like 2 years of grind. And then finally we started to get connected with insiders, and people were very open with sharing. And, we started like a lot of brands do with like the Entrepreneur Source and FranNet and some of these other broker networks. And then, I'd always heard as I started getting into these circles that FranChoice was the place you wanted to be because they've always done a good job of having very talented consultants that can really help brands get connected with the right type of prospective franchisee and all that kind of stuff. But back then, and still is, super hard to get into FranChoice. And Andrew was the freaking gatekeeper. And I remember, man, I called you one summer. I called you out of the blue one summer. I called the FranChoice phone number. I was like, all right, I'm just going to call him, see if what it takes to get in. And you put me on the phone with a freaking intern. And I'm like, hey, it's Drew Carpenito with Advanclean. He's like, yeah, man. What's up? How are you? And I'm like, hey, how do we get in the inventory? He's like, it's not exactly how it works. It's a little bit of a, invite only
Evaluation process.
Yeah. And you just basically blew me off. And then like a year later, I had to get Eric Wexler to send an email to you, to all three of us, to get you back on the phone. And finally, like it ended up working. So yeah, that was how we met. That was probably 2009, 2008, something like that.
That's almost 15 years ago, I bet.
Crazy,
yeah.
right?
And it is nuts, how much time flies. And one thing, and this goes for the franchisors, or should I franchise or listen to these kind of things, is be picky. We were picky about who we brought in as consultants, who we brought in as brands, because if you're gonna try and grow and you want to have nights of good sleep versus sleepless nights wondering about how your owners are doing, you got to be picky. And one thing that we learned is we would take a lot of brands up front, and then we'd give them 8 or 10 new franchisees, and they would almost implode. Stop, this is way too many, we're not ready for this. And so we learned early days of FranChoice is we need to do a better job of vetting out the franchisors for, do you have the capital? Do you have the humans? Do you have the technology systems? Like if we gave you 8 new humans as franchisees in the next year, you have 4 right now, you do that for 4 or 5 years. Like, could you handle that? Or is too like, and then if that's a no, we're probably not the right fit for you, because you're not gonna be able to keep up with the growth. So a lot of our brands, we had a chat with maybe an intern, maybe me, and it's okay, come back in a year when you've got these 4 or 5 things ready to go. And they would come back in and we'd have a nice run. But we learned that we could almost give them too much growth as an entity if they were really in that emerging category, and not ready for prime time, so to speak.
The rate of growth is a massive thing to consider for any emerging franchise. So for a long time, like you were vetting brands, thousands of them. I mean, you've had an inside seat for this whole thing. Like as you think back through all the different franchise companies you've seen and worked with and haven't worked with, like, are there certain things that have kind of stood out in terms of like what the franchise companies that have been able to, number one, successfully recruit good franchisees, and then number two, most importantly, help those franchisees be successful and been able to rinse and repeat that whole equation to grow to, from a couple locations to a national brand in, X amount of time? Like, are there certain things that have that stand out to you as you look back? Like, wow, these are the things that I think, the elements that, some of these brands have had.
There definitely are. And in our case, like you mentioned, non-food, we did a lot of non-food, a lot of non-sexy, because those brands don't do well on the internet, or back then in the Wall Street Journal for running ads. So we were helping a lot of less attractive brands on the surface get their growth. And what you'd learn is the founder or somebody within the exec team has to be ready and excited to go raise the kids, is our term for it. Because people think selling franchises is difficult. It's the easiest part of the entire equation. Getting them open, busy as soon as possible, and through their first year, happy and successfully with some, maybe some bumps and bruises, but on the track towards their expectations. Somebody has to raise the kids. And a lot of franchisors, didn't have that person. And if we gave them a bunch of franchisees, we'll hire somebody. Well, once you have those humans as franchisees, there's no time to catch up and go try and find a director of operations or a franchisee coach or whatever. So that was one.
So they
And
had
then
like franchise
also
ops folks, like they had people in
have to have it.
place to
Yeah.
support and raise the kids and give them
Yep.
the same amount of love that they were getting through the whole franchise development process on the other side once they're franchisees.
A lot of franchisors love selling franchises, and then it's like, oh, I don't want to do the, I don't want to get them through junior high school. That's no fun. That's a lot of work. And so, look, but how do you know that? You talk to the franchisees. So one big part of our process to vet the brands was I'd comb the FDD, comb the financials, but I'd talk to all their franchisees. So I probably talked to, I don't know, 8 or 10,000 franchisees, not by choice, but because that's how you actually learn what a brand is all about. Because franchisees, I've learned, will give you feedback, good, bad, or otherwise, fairly unvarnished. As you and I look at brands for Excel, you have 4 or 5 franchisee calls, your excitement goes up or down depending on how their tone is. Are they partners with the franchisor? What culture have they built amongst their franchisee base is gigantic.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of an art to having those conversations and asking the right questions when you're talking to a franchisee to kind of slowly extract more and more information versus, are you happy and are you making money? Like that's obviously not how most people would approach it, but that's, that's the elephant in the room. And there's a little bit of an art to kind of get there and have those conversations. But yeah, I mean, that's the litmus test, right? Like that's the foundation. Like if a brand has good franchisees, like that is the foundation upon which they can grow.
Yeah, when I help my candidates jump into validation calls of a franchise system or two, there's a lot of coaching. Here's how to kind of break into those conversations. I always say buy them dinner first, like warm them up, get to know them before you ask what's your EBITDA and what's your bottom line and that kind of thing. Because franchisees, I've learned, want to share because they were in your shoes 6 months, 6 years, whenever it was ago. And so they want to help you decide if it's the right thing and a good decision or not. And a brand with very limited validation or not a lot of open seasoned franchisees, at that point, those pioneering type candidates are more buying the founder. So how do you use a founder to tell the story and share their expectations and that kind of thing? It just gets more complicated the smaller the brand is in terms of trying to have that candidate get a true set of proper expectations for their time as a franchisee if they decide to move forward.
So if I'm putting myself in the shoes of like an emerging franchise company that maybe has 1-2 units,
mm-hmm.
and it's like, great, we've got a company store that's successful, we've got a couple franchisees, like they're happy. It's like, at what point have you seen like companies start to make that investment in franchise ops folks, technology stuff, right, to raise the kids if they want to accelerate the growth once they've got a couple proof of concepts out there?
Well, they typically, to your question, sell a few, get way behind, and then have to hit pause and do it over. Now, but when you look at like a brand, say it's a franchisor or holding company or second or third brand for a seasoned franchise person, what they do is they say, okay, when we built brand one, we were behind on this, this, and this. We didn't have marketing, didn't have a 90-day ramp program. We kept the item 7 too light. What did we learn that we screwed up on? And they build all that in. And the biggest thing they do is they hire 1 or 2 headcount ahead on the franchise tip of the spear support people. You don't need to have a COO and 2 VPs and paper pushes. You know, people are going to be in that franchisee's market, in their text messages when they have issues. That first 6 months of what I get myself into, and then now I'm open for the first 6 months. That's when all of your support effort goes into those people. And so you need to have the frontline people, and they're not expensive or hard to find, but you have to be ahead of that because they need to be able to get your institutional knowledge and your education ingrained in them so they can depart or impart it on those franchisees the way you want it to, and be a good culture fit and be a good listener, and a lot of empathy, a lot of life coaching, sometimes marriage counseling. I mean, there's that the franchise operations people are massive in our world. And they don't get enough credit, but that is what you need is humans who are willing to take the call at 5 o'clock and take the stressed out spouse call or whatever to help get that franchisee through the tough times.
Yeah. So like they're as a young brand, like, hey, you start to find, you could build a pipeline of prospective franchisees, you kind of start to get a feel for the run rate and like how many candidates will convert into franchisees. So you have a little bit of a leading indicator, but you're still investing way ahead of profitability as a franchisor in terms of, getting to royalty self-sufficiency, making money. Like it's a long game. So like having access to the proper amount of capital, which you can make these investments as your franchise system continues to grow, but you need to be prepared to make the investments. Like having access to capital, I would imagine, is like a pretty big piece to the puzzle for a lot of the successful franchise companies that have gone from 1 to 400 units across the country.
Yeah, you got to have dry powder ready to deploy. If you ask, like we did that Springboard Emerging Franchisor Conference, and a lot of the topics are kind of universal. Emerging franchisors. I'm in my first year, or should I franchise my idea or not? And the number you hear is, it's $1 million adventure to go from starting out a franchise, getting an FDD, ramping up support operations, fran dev, to hopefully being royalty self-sufficient, because you have to have all these humans and systems and stuff to support owners before they're ever giving you a whole lot in terms of royalty share, because their AUVs don't kick high until year 2 and 3. And so most franchisors' books are upside down for the first 3 to 4 years, depending on how quickly they can get them open. Because selling franchises doesn't put anything to the bottom line for a franchisor. That's all spent getting those franchisees off the ground. So the real key is getting them open. Yeah, I think it's $1 million plus adventure, even to do like a regional rollout, much less going the broker or, going national in a hurry. I think it's still just to do the operational side and have good human beings to support them. I think it's a 7-figure deal to launch a franchise company.
Yeah. Like spread out over 3 to 5 years kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like
over your first 4 years.
Continually reinvesting as you see the growth continuing to happen. And that royalty self-sufficiency number is a massive milestone to strive towards.
Yeah.
And you only get there if you have happy and profitable franchisees that are generating royalties, right? So it's like the ecosystem that happens. Like, have you seen, like, so if I'm a young emerging franchise company, right? And I'm just geared up, man. I got this. I want to go national. Yeah. Let's go. Is that the approach you've seen a lot of the successful franchise companies take, or has it been something of, a different pace of growth through like different phases?
I think if you are launching off of a platform, you have a multi-brand, you could probably go fast because you've already got systems and humans that have done it before. Let's say you're a true emerging, this is my first rodeo doing this. Let's say you wanted to get to 100 locations or 100 territories in 4 years. I've seen both. Sell a bunch, open them up, spend 2 to 3 years of triage, end up with 100 left after you maybe sold 150. And that is a stressful, expensive, and frankly, I think improper way to go about getting there. Whereas if you just opened up like 5 your first year, say you got corporate locations, small staff, just get 5, and then get 10. Like if you just double that, but love on those franchisees, invest marketing in their market to make sure they're happy and successful. If the first 10 are great and happy and have great P&Ls, the next 90 are not that hard to onboard and sell. If out of the first 20, 10 don't make it or feel neglected, or the math wasn't thought through or whatever, because you did ready, fire, aim, that cleanup is way more expensive. And frankly, the enterprise value of that franchisor on the second plan, the crawl, walk, run plan, is way better. You don't have as many sold not opens. Private equity or a holding company would love to see that story versus, well, we got some item 20 cleanup, but hey, that's 3 years old now, everything's fine. That's not the story you want to have. And frankly, you haven't done it right by those franchisees if you wing it like that. It's just not fair to them.
Yeah, and it's just full of friction like that triage approach, right? Like
sleepless nights, lawsuit threats. It's terrible.
Yeah, and it just stalls everything, and maybe you got to the number, but at what cost, right? Not just financially, but also franchisees' lives and all that kind of stuff, and
karma, being a good human.
Yeah, and not to mention it is risky, like legally, like at some point, like there'll be some regulation that even more so than there is, I think, in the franchise world. But I think
Agreed.
Like it's like, and then like you as a young emerging brand, even if you're a founder listening to this podcast, you're getting our opinions. You also got all different types of people throwing their opinions at you, right? And like, it's hard to filter through some of this advice to understand like what the right approach for your company is going to be. Because I mean, we've heard it from the brands that we've talked about. We've been talking to with Excel. Like, we'll hop on a 45-minute call with a brand that's just not a fit for us, and they will tell us that they've got more out of a 45-minute get down to it call than they had with the other years that they have spent preparing for this moment to franchise. It's
Correct.
wild. Everybody's
Well,
got an
and
opinion.
we'd meet. Yeah, no, it is an opinion, but like I think if you've watched it happen enough through our chairs, within franchise and you being an emerging franchisor and doing what you've done, like there are patterns to problems and patterns to success. Doesn't mean you're going to avoid all the problems or anything like that. But I do think like a crawl, walk, run approach for a very young brand, so you can drive to most of your first 10 franchisees or have a short flight or just just a regional small organic rollout makes sense because it allows you to fix all things that could break within your franchise system because something's going to break if you bring on a bunch of new franchisees and you can address it quickly because I don't think franchisees get upset when there's problems. They get upset when the problems are not listened to or addressed. It's like, well, we tried is not a good enough answer when they've put down 100 grand in franchise fees to buy 3 territories and blood, sweat, and tears, and they've changed their life. I mean, what I think people forget too often is like this is a major life altering move for all these franchisees. And while the whole thing is wealth creation in franchising, we should be creating wealth for them first. They're taking the biggest risk. They had done this before. Like I think sometimes that focus on the franchisee, their best economic picture, and that kind of thing gets kind of bumped down the priority list. And if you put that priority as number one, your enterprise value, your franchisor will be worth more. Financially, it's cold-blooded math, but also you'll have a happy, successful system. You like going to your national conferences, and so take a point or two off your own royalty to help make them some more money, pump some marketing into them as they launch to make sure they have happy first 6 months. Like those little things that you see the smart franchisors do go miles. And if you do it early, your first 10 people can be super happy. And then you got your own cheering section to sell the next 100 franchises and open them up, and they'll help support those new franchisees. And the whole thing becomes a very positive culture and environment.
Yeah, it's a whole new dynamic, like getting into the franchise, like starting to franchise your business as a founder. Because you're used to operating the business, but now you're in a completely different dynamic with the franchisees who are self-employed entrepreneurs and have that empowerment and that liberation. And they're going to ask you, they're going to talk to you a little bit differently than an employee would, because you can't just fire the franchisees, and you shouldn't be able to. But yeah, I mean, like you said, like honestly, like if you boil it down, if you have a relentless focus on helping your franchisees be happy and profitable, and happiness is different to all franchisees. Profitability, everybody's going to have different financial goals. Some franchisees might want to scale, some might want to keep it lifestyle friendly business, whatever. But if you understand like what their goals are and what their expectations are and how that jives with your expectations, then it's really that simple. But the execution of it is where you see it get fairly inconsistent from brand to brand in the emerging world.
Agreed. And I think too many people get stuck on like, who can I sell a franchise to versus who should I sell this franchise to? They whittle down their item sevens to as low as I can possibly get it, put the minimum requirements as low as they possibly can. And then they oversell the economics. Maybe they're a 20-year-old corporate location. They start talking about their numbers. Like if they would just have realistic expectations on investment, how much work it's really going to be, especially in that first year, and then what the true economic picture is, and not some kind of puffery on either side of that, then people can decide, am I willing to get into this business with you as my partner under those assumptions or not? When you oversell or overpromise or make it more absentee than it actually is or whatever, that's when people get upset because they're sold a bill of goods that you really can't, that business is not designed to run that way. And we see that all the time in our world where brands are, hey, we gotta promise semi-absentee, we gotta promise this and that. It's like, well, if the business doesn't work that way, that is not what you want to do. You just got to find different humans that have more net worth or more time, whatever those needs are, to do it right. And I've watched a lot of franchisors lately, boost their marketing in item 7 or boost their first year expenditures or whatever it is versus trying to cut them down, because they know if the franchisee is not ready to spend the money or can't, they're not going to make it to year 3. They're going to run it lean and mean or fizzle out or close their doors.
Yeah. A lot of phases to taking a company, expanding it through franchising. So like maybe
it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. It's not cheap, and it's not quick, right? Like it's none of those things.
And I think to your point, like, a founder, if they've only done whatever their industry is, right, their business or whatever, they haven't done a franchise before, somebody on their team needs to have seen and been through some of this, whether it's a COO or an advisory board or whatever it is, consultants or whatever, just so they know what these dynamics look like. Because running whatever your business is, whether you're painting houses or opening salons or whatever it is, versus teaching other humans across the country to run that same business, is two fully separate endeavors. And you got to have people who know what they're doing on both sides of it.
And that was kind of like the genesis of, where Excel came from, right? Is to, to try to, you've seen the rise of the big FSOs over the years, that they've kind of gotten to a point where they've proven that they can grow brands quickly. They kind of need to have brands that are ready to grow quickly. But there's kind of this gap for like super early emerging brands that kind of wanted to take that crawl, walk, run approach. And that was how we created Excel. There's a third partner who's going to remain nameless, because he's just going to remain nameless for confidentiality reasons, because he's still working.
He's a big deal.
He's a big deal. Yeah,
that's why.
It's a very big deal. And so, I mean, that was the genesis. And like, so here you have two franchise brokers that created an FSO, which a big part of our belief and strategy to help young brands grow is to actually not work through franchise brokers, which is kind of ironic. But maybe we can talk a little bit about like, hey, okay, I'm a young brand, just got my FDD, got my ops manual, probably overpaid for my ops manual. Nobody's going to read it anyways. Who really cares? So, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. I'm ready. How do I, where do I find my first franchisee? Where do I find my first 5 franchisees? Like if you put yourself in that shoes, like what do they do? Like, how do they start to find franchisees and vet them to know if they're the right franchisees?
Yeah, I mean, if you're at that level, going brokers is tough, because you only get one chance to make that first impression. If you're not ready for it, you don't get to go back when you are ready for it. So yes, I helped launch Franchise Choice, and yes, I'm saying don't use broker networks as your first thing if you have 2 franchisees, because you have to be ready to go and do.
You got to go ready to go
2 deals
go
a month. You have to be ready to go.
It's national.
100%.
Brokers are a great source for national, but not like the regional rollout like we were talking about.
Yeah, so if you're like an Excel potential client or just want the advice, like, hey, you got a bunch of brand fans within your customer base. A lot of franchisors, their first few come from friends and family or customers, and they roll out regionally or whatever. So that's a good place to do it. You can find referral sources that are out there, if you hunt it down. And frankly, Drew, what you've built for Excel with the organic, hyper targeted lead generation engine that you've got designed is a really strong way, because you can maximize your dollars and choose, okay, I'm in Nashville here where I live now, and I want to go regional. So I'm going to choose Charlotte, Raleigh, Atlanta, Knoxville, pick, Florida and maybe Texas as my path towards expansion. And you and I could work out a program. Okay, I want to add 6 new franchisees, one every other month next year. What's that spend look like? How do we do it? How do we target it? So there are people who can help a franchisor figure that out. Doesn't mean you should never use brokers by any stretch, but brokers are typically high volume, just like the large FSOs are looking for high volume franchisors. If you're not at that point in your development, organic is a great way to go. Paid leads are tough, doing. I mean, what you've built, man, is rare, and very valuable. And if your brand has a little, say, curb appeal, it's kind of cool, looks good online, it can be even easier. But that way, I think you can get a handful of new franchisees in the markets you want them in for a reasonable cost per franchisee acquisition. Because the other avenues, you're kind of putting a lot of money up front and hoping for the best. And we made a lot of franchisors who have done that to the tune of 6 figures. Like, well, I got 14 territory checks and no leads last year, as one franchisor told us last week. Well, they're bummed, but they're also out all that dry powder to find their first 10 franchisees. So there are some methods like what you've built to organically and targeted in a targeted fashion find that first handful would be my advice to them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some creative
You
ways.
agree with that?
100%. Yeah. I think, what I've figured out has taken me years of my life to figure out, but it's for the right company. It can work very, very well from a lead generation perspective. Now, that's like one part of this equation, right? Because then, it's not just about generating leads. I mean, yeah, it's about generating good, high quality leads, but just because somebody inquires on your website about your franchise, there's a whole nother layer to this thing around process. What does your discovery process look like? Some people call it discovery, some people call it sales process, whatever it is. And then there's the who is running the sales process. And I can speak from personal experience of I was going to use the word wasting. I will use the word investing. Back early in my life with AdvantaClean of grinding it out on the phones with no process. I was like I could talk to people, but that's all I do. I would just talk to them. Here's our FDD. What do you want to talk about today? And there was no process. And then there's been a couple of people that connected the dots, and then it's like, wow, okay, like a process works. Like, what do you have to say about what happens after you get like a good quality inquiry on the website or whatever it may be, who's somebody who's interested in learning more about the franchise?
I think two things you actually do prior to that are have a well-defined avatar of who you want your franchisees to be, whether that's financial, skill set, outgoing to salesperson, whatever you need to have. Like, you need to have that well thought through. And then you also need to decide, what are we selling? Do we have good validation that we have franchisees first try to print money? Then lead with that. If you don't, you've got one unit and they're brand new, then you're probably going to lead with your founder and the story more. It's going to be more of a pioneering type candidate than I need a lot of research to make my decision or data to make my choice. So you have to define who you want and what the end result you want them to end up at the end of the process with is. Once you have that, you can design a sales process that gradually piques their interest as they go through it, as you educate them, but also sets bars for them to get over, mutual evaluation process, whether it's financial, skill set, is it a cultural fit? Will I enjoy working with this guy and girl for the next 7 or 10 years? Is a real thing most franchisors don't think through. So the ultimate goal is to have them get their education, get their P&L built, talk to your current franchisees, your executive team, et cetera, and have their interest peaked 6 to 8 weeks into that educational mutual evaluation process working together. And you have to then make a decision. Do you want to have those humans in your family? But there's a lot, as you know, Drew, you built these before. There's a lot of art in how you package that messaging, when you use certain things, how you create those levers from the get over, the bars from the leap over. So it's a lot more nuanced than you think. But if you have a repeatable, consistent process, you include the founder, you include the operations team. Okay, what we're saying here in the sales process, what you are planning to deliver to these franchisees, that all kind of lines up. You can have a nice funnel that'll pick the best franchisees most often. No development system is perfect. You will be fooled. You might miss a couple of great people that just don't like your process, but to run the best math and most efficient development process of a young franchisor, it's worth the pain of 6 weeks of designing this very carefully, and then have your first 2 years be a pretty smooth pipeline of bringing new humans into your franchise family.
Yeah, no, well said. There's a lot of thought that needs to go into how to design that mutual evaluation, sales, discovery process, whatever you want to call it. But there's also the person too, right? Like, that's running that process with candidates. Because it's like, yeah. I mean, rightfully so, like it's a life-changing decision for a lot of franchise owners. Big decision, should be big commitment on both sides, kind of like getting married. It's a little bit, it's not just about educating them, because it's it's a game of inches in terms of like all the other things that can go wrong from a spouse, like not being on board and not knowing that until the 11th hour, which candidly can happen more often than you think.
They haven't heard about it until the 11th hour from their spouse.
Yeah. Oh, hey, honey, we're going to a discovery day.
What?
What? We're buying a business? No, you're not.
100%.
And rightfully so. If you do it like that, you deserve that answer. But like it's part of this, designing it to go smoothly and efficiently. It's the person running that process is a big deal.
It typically shouldn't be the founder, I don't think. I think the founder should be focused on raising the kids. That's their specialty. And it's probably the easiest component. Obviously, I'm biased on this podcast with Excel. Like, I think outsourcing development is a pretty easy thing to do. But if you do decide to outsource it to an FSO or a third party, or bring in somebody you don't know yet from the franchising world, is don't just leave it to them. Like, you need to get eyes on these candidates early. You need to set very clear expectations as to who you want as franchisees, and you got to say no to the ones you don't have confidence in, because that $50,000 no by not getting that franchise fee is worth 2 years and who knows how much in pain you're saving yourself by bringing in the wrong kind of people, whether it's cultural fit, improper expectations, them wanting to, tail wag the dog. Who knows what it could be when you're a young emerging franchisor, but that, and then don't sell people whole markets, give them what they can, nobody needs to own all that land or Houston as your third franchisee. So there's a lot of things that you can either get advice on from people like you, Drew, or other, folks out there that'll save that emerging franchisor a lot of pain and having to unwind that. Because think of how many brands we meet, and you open the FTD, you're like, who helped you design this, right? Your item 7's wonky, your territories make no sense, or whatever they got going on. And so it's so worth finding some advice. The cool thing about franchising, and this is since I was 21 years old, is like, people want to help. Like, if you raise your hand and ask for it and go to some things, go to emerging franchisor conference or whatever, people do want to help you and give you good advice. Just kind of find the right folks and get networked into the right resources, in my experience.
Yeah, no, well said. I think, if you just ask, right,
Mm-hmm.
you can start to piece together bits and pieces and nuggets from different people and start to get calibrated on, the different approaches and the pros and cons of different advice you're getting from certain folks and all that kind of stuff. Well, let me ask you this. Like, how many times have you seen a good quality franchise brand, like great business model? They've got, they have happy and profitable franchisees. They figured out lead generation. They're getting candidates who are interested. They've got a process, but they might not have the right person in the seat running that process. And it's unfortunate to see, right? Because like, you don't even want to think about the opportunity cost of that.
It's the most annoying part of our job as franchise consultants, is when you got an awesome opportunity, you have to tell your candidate, don't mind that salesperson you're talking to the next 2 months. Once you're in, you're passed down. So don't worry about, salesperson A, B, or C there or whatever. And you have to understand, like, when I ask my people, like, after they decided to purchase, why did you buy the franchise? It's never investment size, margins. It's always like, it felt right. I trusted the, there's all those soft, more, like not surface level, more, like subtle things that they've gathered through the course of the process. And the big part of that is how that salesperson represents your brand. And if they're abrasive, disorganized, talking down to people, or blowing smoke up their skirts, hoping to get a sale because they got to pay their rent next month because they're desperate. All those different things can really throw that out of whack. And so that salesperson is an extension of you and your brand 100%. And so whether you outsource it or keep it in-house, I kind of like in-house for younger brands too, because you have more control over that a little bit. Is you can then you hear what they're saying to people. You have a little more control over what that messaging is. But it's a massive factor, especially if you only have like 2 or 3 franchisees. They're buying that salesperson, they're buying you way more than they're buying any kind of reality you have over 12 months of franchising with no item 19 or whatever. So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's so much more than just, okay, hey, we're ready to franchise. Who's ready to
Yeah.
buy? Who's ready to open some of these locations, these units? Come on. Yeah, there's and you see it, like franchise development continues to evolve, right? Like it changes.
Lead
What works, what
generation
doesn't
evolves.
work. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a moving target. And you got competition, like with good quality brands. Like you will have people that are looking at multiple franchise concepts, comparing your business to other franchises, your royalty fee, your franchise fee, your territory size, your unit economics, your systems, all this kind of stuff. And to very rarely is somebody just kind of focused on one franchise, or maybe they're looking at existing businesses or stuff like that. So like having competitive fee structure, which we've been talking to one company that, in our opinion, their fee structure is not very competitive, but
Mhm.
we don't know if they see that yet. It's high compared
Yeah.
to the market. And there's just it's not an easy thing to get right, but when you get it right, it helps you obviously get to where you want to get to in the right way. But when you get it wrong, it could set you back years, not to mention the cost of it.
Well, most brands never get there, right? Most brands never get past 5 or 10 franchisees. They don't only lose years, they never leave the starting blocks. They sell a couple to their brother-in-law and an uncle and maybe a customer that liked the cookies or whatever, but then you never hear about those brands. You never hear them on a regional or national basis. And the one thing, like, it always shocks me, but if you ask a franchisor, like when you put yourself in the shoes of a candidate coming, like, what did when you secret shocked yourself, essentially, why would I do that? It's like, you're asking people to trust you and buy into your brand, and you haven't like checked out the competition. You ask them, do you have other major competitors? Yeah, there's a couple guys, and you find out there's 8, national brands. It's just putting yourself, I think, in the shoes of a candidate and what their mindset is, and getting yourself out of your own business as an emerging franchisor is a very valuable use of time to know what you're up against, because you're right. The way people can get information now, unless they're just a raving fan of your location or your brand, they're looking at other stuff. And once you start Googling or looking at Twitter or X or whatever on franchise, like, you're going to get endless stuff. And all of a sudden their minds start wandering. So you don't have a captive audience very often unless they're a referral from a current franchisee or something like that.
Well said.
And frankly, they should be looking at other ideas. A good candidate should compare and contrast, not just fall in love with the workout or the kids class or the sandwich. I mean, Quiznos sold hundreds of locations, none of them ever made any money because the sandwiches were good. And so
No, and it is the other side of the coin, right? Is like how a candidate goes through the mutual evaluation process, or just the process. I mean, there's a strong correlation to how they perform as franchisees. Are they asking good
yes.
questions? Are they asking questions at all? Are they doing their homework? Are they quickly, getting back any information you're asking for them? And there's like little things you can kind of look for to kind of like get a feel for, just how they're behaving during that process. Because I don't know what percentage it is, but there is a strong correlation of how they act during that process and how they're going to be as franchisees.
Agreed. And look at get feedback from your current franchisees. If they have a call with them, did you like them? Would you want to hang out with them at convention next spring in Orlando? Those simple things are very valuable. And it also, if you have a handful of early franchisees, in fact, they're a part of it, like, we're helping build this together. If you can create that kind of environment, and maybe it was Jeff, somebody said, at some point you just quit working with a-holes, and so, like, if somebody has 20 million bucks and they've been a franchisee 6 times over, and they could be your biggest, you know, feather on your cap to have as your new franchisee, but they suck, like, move on. It's just like, life is way too short to have those kind of folks. Like, the cultural fit when you're in your first 8 or 10. Like, when we validate with these potential brand partners for Excel and they have under 10 franchisees, how those people interact and their vibe is massive. It's almost as important as is the founder ready to take this on? And, have they built that culture? It's a big thing, and it's a huge differentiator amongst brands that we see, ones that have focused on that and ones that have not. And typically it's communication and how they put in their franchisees first. If they're doing those two things well, you tend to have a pretty good vibe. If they don't, you can tell in your first two phone calls.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why we tell prospective franchisees to make sure you call a bunch of existing franchisees when we're working with them with our broker ads on. So yeah.
Well,
no,
it's true. It's true though. I mean, when you work
Oh
with
yeah.
candidates, like, this is exciting. I thought about this forever. What can I look at? Ooh, Andrew has these three exciting brands I never heard of. This is so cool. But like, I feel like the picture comes together for a candidate when they start talking to franchisees. Like, it kind of crystallizes. I can do this. This fits for my family. I like this from a cultural, whatever those things are, or it doesn't. If it doesn't come together and make sense, then they shouldn't do it, and they frankly very rarely do. So whatever you do to create your story with franchisees or franchisees plus your executive team to create a realistic picture, that's why they buy or why they don't. But the sooner you get to that answer, yes or no, with proper information gathering, the better off both parties are, because trying to force it with a decision this big never works.
No. And again, if you want to kind of like distill it down to the two things, it's like, if your franchisees are happy and profitable, all this stuff
quickly.
Yes, quickly, it becomes a lot easier at the end of the day. So no, it's been great, man. You have any final thoughts or nuggets you want to drop before we wrap up?
I got asked by actually a gentleman who's looking to maybe franchise his business today. We had a Zoom he found on LinkedIn or something like that. And he's like, what would you say the three things you really have to have before? Because he doesn't have any franchisees yet. Looking at how do I find a franchise? It's like very early on in kind of the greenhorn stage. And I'm like, do you have compelling unit level economics? Because if you don't, the rest of it doesn't really matter. Do you have a bulletproof path to success for those franchisees to leave your training and get busy early? You have to have that. It takes care of so many other issues. And I think most importantly, whether it's the founder like this guy was or on the team, somebody really has to want to raise the kids. That is, as we've learned with working with founders or small executive teams, like, when somebody in there is totally focused every day on how can I make these franchisees successful and happy, you got a great start to do it right. As you learn, add more systems, add more tech, add more L&D. But if you don't have that person to lead that charge, the rest of it never comes in behind it, and the franchisees get left behind. So decide, do you want to raise the kids if you're an emerging franchisor? Because that's the next 4 years of your life. Now, the rewards are massive once you get past that point, but it's real work, and the money comes later. You got to be kind of that servant, teacher, coach, leader, loving on people for a long time before the rewards come back to you as a franchisor.
Very well said. I mean, like, again, you take all this kind of stuff and you boil it down to a few key things, and there's so much.
Because it sounds daunting at first, right? Where do we even start if we become a franchisor? Well, if those first few key tenants aren't as a part of you or a part of your business, then don't open up 4 more locations, make a bunch of money doing that. You'll be a much happier person than trying to train a bunch of franchisees. It's just, I bet you and I, over the course of the year, tell way more people, are you sure you want to be doing this franchising thing, than we say, yes, you should definitely try and take this thing national. I mean, I bet it's 2 or 3 to 1,
Yeah, for sure. No, there's no doubt. And that's probably why, I was talking about the Wolf. I was talking with the Wolf earlier. He came up with some stat, man. Oh, what was it? The median number of open franchise locations, not the average.
38.
The average 38.
Yep.
Crazy, right? Isn't that nuts? Of the 3,000 or so, or whatever that number is, franchise concepts, including the big boys, including Chick-fil-A, because I asked him if he included Chick-fil-A in those numbers, and he did. We're talking Marriott's, we're talking McDonald's,
Subway,
Burger King,
yeah,
everything. The median number is 38. The average number, I think, was 22, but it's skewed by those big boys. So, like, it ain't easy, and very few companies can get there.
I mean, even our view is skewed with being in the inside franchise, because a lot of our brands come in and they do well and they take off. But what you don't see is like, at least when I was there, and now Trent does it for us, but like you probably look at 24, 25 brands to let one into the inventory. So where the other 24 end up, somewhere under that 38 number, or they never get out of the gates because they don't have unit economics, they're poorly funded as a franchisor, or whatever their issue is. So yeah, if you're a candidate trying to navigate where do I start looking for the right franchise for me, or a franchisor looking to start becoming a franchisor and do it the right way, you got to spend some time doing your research because there's a lot to learn, and it'll save you a mountain of time and pain and money, frankly, if you do that.
No, 100%.
That's why these podcasts like you're doing are so valuable, because you can get some of these nuggets and then, go do your own research and figure it out if you're either one of those camps.
Yeah. And it's possible. Like people, from a franchisee perspective, people go on to have a lot of success with certain franchises. Franchisors, the good ones, get past that 38 number, get to royalty self-sufficiency. And then, you got the private equity companies that start coming knocking, right? And look, that's why private equity companies are paying these insane multiples for franchise systems, because the ones that can get past those critical milestones and truly expand nationally, it's not a big pool of brands that get there.
I probably sound too doom and gloom with some of those comments, Drew, but it's like,
no, but I mean,
want to help them avoid the pitfalls and, do the work so you can avoid that stuff and be on the right path, whether it's you owning 5 Club Pilates and being happy as a clam and your retirements and kids' college are covered, or if you're a franchisor trying to get to 50, so PE does think you're rad and want to buy you. Like, there's so many humans in our world that'll help you avoid the pitfalls along the way. You just got to ask and, look into these topics in more detail, and you can figure it out. Because a lot of people we know have made buckets of money as franchisors and franchisees, because there's plenty of opportunity. Entrepreneurship is obviously a wonderful thing, and franchising, I think, is just a less risky way to go about it, but it's not with no risk. It's not how it works.
Yeah. And if you can arm yourself listening to podcasts, reading books, talking to franchisees, talking to franchisors, whatever it is, you get calibrated and you get dialed in to, what to look at. Because a lot of what you've shared today, is a franchise company even ready to franchise? Like, do they have a compelling case to franchise with, I think it was unit economics, having the right people in place to raise the kids. And what was the third one?
And you want to get them out of the gates and successful quick. Do you have a ramp up plan to get them onboarded and successful as quickly as possible?
Like, if you look at those 3 things through the lens of a franchise candidate, those are the same things you should be evaluating franchises that you're looking at through, right? Like, it's all like one big ecosystem because everything's so interconnected.
100%. And you ask like a franchisor whether where do you see yourself? Where do you see your role in the business in 3 years? And they give you a dumbfounded look back. I just get so nervous because, there's so much work to be done. Like, somebody needs to lead this charge. And if you're a candidate and the franchisor gives you that blank stare, run, don't walk. Find a different brand that you feel very confident in, because when the tough times happen in that first year, you need to have that trust and relationship with that brand or those people to get you through it. And you should be offering that same thing to your franchisees if you're that emerging franchisor, because they need it.
Yeah. Well said. All right. I've been waiting to ask this question.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining. If people want to get in touch with you, Andrew, co-founder of Excel Franchise Development, how can they do that?
If you're a franchisor, it's Andrew@excelfd.com. And if you're a candidate, it's AndrewHorton@franchoice.com.
There you have it.
You and I have been having this conversation about something like Excel for, I don't know how many years now, 3 or 4 years. So I'm excited to partner in it with you and help these younger franchisors figure the game out the right way. It's gonna be a great adventure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Do it the right way. All right, brother. I'll let you roll.
All right, man.
Thanks.
Be good, brother. Talk to you soon.
That's a wrap. Hope you found a nugget or two in there that can help you on your franchise journey. And if you ever want to talk franchising, reach out to me anytime.